So what if betrayal and self-betrayal can be simplified where your inside and outside have a conflict? So that's a way of saying you can't hold the split inside, so then you act it out or project it, or there's all these different ways, transference, countertransference, blah, blah, blah. But essentially, your inner and outer worlds are not equal. And it's a containment issue, and it's a flooding issue, it's a complexity issue, it's a possession issue, whatever models to point it out. So how do you make it more workable? That's always a challenge of some of these mental theories. They might be accurate describing the dynamic, the phenomena, the thing that's out there. But the description doesn't equal a prescription. The description doesn't equal a pathway out of it. Sometimes the description equals another trap, another double bind. So if you judge your self-betrayal, then you're not tracking inside versus outside. You're not tracking the dissonance. It's still hiding. It's still tricky to see. So if I oversell the betrayal as like some giant, horrible thing that must be fixed, it creates the assumption that the healing of it is also some giant thing, or tackling it and whatever has to be the same thing. It doesn't address that a lot of self-betrayal is just trickster energy, self-deception, an illusion. A little piece that's moved, that's a little off. Just a little bit of sabotage can create self-deception and self-betrayal. But I think I had a teaser in the Discord. What did I break down the two needs? Here? So betrayal wounds are getting stirred up and acted out. So I suspect it's driven by self-betrayal wounds from childhood. Getting double-binded by the pedo energy. So the pedo is like more of a extra invasion. Oh, that's just describing the Discord dynamic. But one of the things for pedo level, molestation level self-betrayal is you mentally are mind raped. Oh, I guess this part. And then maybe part of you enjoys the connection. And this could be expressed in different ways. So it doesn't have to be like pure sensory joy, but if molestation is about sensory organs of pleasure, it's easy for the genitals and the sensitive parts to get turned on by the person that's mentally raping you. And if you're at a really young age and you have a father or a mother or some caregiver who's giving you a story to voice you, and they're also saying, if you tell on me, your world's going to collapse, or I'm going to get in trouble, or I'm going to lose my job. That's going to create this double bind that I can't even conceive. So if this happens at a very young age, then that makes a tear in the soul. And even if you're a second generation of this, I think the damage can be just as big. maybe if you're a second or third generation of this, it might be so big because you don't have the story of the original mind rape, the original molestation. That was my theory with the historical trauma in the Chinese group. That I might be acting out martial law and communist China Civil War traumas because I don't have the story. And I saw that happen in the group. There were patterns that seemed to fit the historical intergenerational trauma. So if there's two different conflicts, or there's a conflict, then you can't hold the split. So then in the group, we've seen frozen terror, and then we've seen id gratification on steroids. That's one way of that's acted out was moral outrage. So it's accurate that there is divorce rage. There was past mind rape. So then somebody who is a recent figure that mind rapes you is a new target, the stand-in for some past divorce rage. And then if you can get even and cause injury, you get a sense of great grandiosity, pleasure, id gratification, but it doesn't change anything. It causes a trauma bond, and it sort of feels like it does something because you're standing up against your original wounder. But what's lost is your grief didn't get expressed. The inner and outer aren't held together. The split isn't held in ISTDP theory. There isn't enough witnessing and expression to get from the anger to the grief, or maybe from the anger, then impulse up, and then mobilize the impulse to do the betrayal, and go through the betrayal steps to finally mourn the loss of your past, mourn the double bind of loving and hating, of getting torn apart. Because if these wounds happen when you were too young to have boundaries, betrayal, yeah, or they happen to your abuser who was too young to have boundaries, you can't just blame you or blame the abuser for not doing good enough, because it's a power imbalance. That's a genuine life experience where the child is helpless and gets an unfair, abusive injury that's lifelong, that is very outrageous, that is worthy of moral outrage, worthy of judgment, but there's no way to change it. That's just what happened. That sounds cold, right? But is that reality? Now, the reality doesn't say that you can't change it moving forward, but the reality is the past situation was a helpless situation where you're trapped in a situation where the predator, let's say it's a first generation pedo invasion, you're trapped and the person doesn't even see you and they just want to get their fantasy and they're using you. You're totally devoiced and you're totally objectified. You're totally violated in the worst way, and the abuser is probably grooming and dumping their pedo violation into you, initiating you into something. Which the way out of betrayal is trying to make something out of it for a future. That's what I'm trying to shapeshift to try to figure out how to frame it that way. But the moral outrage and these two splits is going to have a tendency to repetition compulsion, because you want to make sense of the past trauma, because the trauma was outrageous to you, but it was also outrageous up the line of your abuser and all the other people. I've read and heard that a lot of pedo molestation repeats, because a future abuser wants to make sense of the abuse, so they have to revisit the abuse by reversing the role. They get possessed by the confusion of the initiation, so then they pass it on. Who's the original invasion? I don't know. Maybe it's a demon, maybe it's not. I don't know. Maybe it's also a power game. Maybe it's an initiation where some great leaders also got initiated through this ability to... Because if you get this high of oceanic merging, then you can just like run a business and just conquer shit. So I'm guessing some people might be able to make this adaptive. Richard Grannon says like a lot of molestations common in the boarding schools or the higher up, whatever. So that might be a way of boot camp to like get people to be like psychopaths or power hungry archons. I wonder if the Fountain of Comfort Jacob's spinoff is also a sign of some sort of molestation or pedo history. Why would you name a mental health ideal as Fountain of Comfort? He said there's links to some Jewish terms, but even still choosing it sounds a bit molesty to me. Ooh. I don't know if this is going to be... maybe. So here's part of Luke Sala giant mapping of something. Of all kinds of stuff, inner child stuff. Let me see if I can find it. Upload in the chat. Then you can look up his name and probably his or her name and find his giant collection of visuals. So if you have your public self's way out there, and then you have your conscious self in the middle, and then you have your inner child, other parts over here. A lot of mental health is on the fixing side. So we fix the mask. We create a false self. And then the problem with codependent healing is codependents already have a false self. They've lost themselves to a false self. So when they go into therapy, it's easy for the therapy to reinforce the fawn self. And then I wonder if molestation, pedo, self-betrayal wounds are more also like deep soul murder here. The true self, the inner child, the divine spark, the soul. And then you had like these cool images. What's this image? So you have your core self, then your unconscious inner child, then you have your wounded child. And then at 1 to 2 years old, you have this sort of first mask. maybe if a molestation wound happens in the early years, that's why there's so much invasive power. Then as you get older, you develop a personality and ego masks. And then you have this layers of stuff. Your pure inner self, and then inner child purpose, inner child scenario, characteristics, and all you know is the outside wounded layer, because the wounds end up being scar tissue, and then you lost your softness inside. Where here? So this is where this group has a challenge where I'm trying to use a lot of psychotherapy models. And then I can pull from my spiritual practice, and I can pull from my past explorations into soul work, into depth psychology, into grand narratives. But it's hard to it's hard to make spiritual teaching stuff into models and language because it's inherently ineffable. It's inherently hard to describe. It's hard to transmit in person, let alone on Zoom. So some of it's trying to maybe work with the betrayal wound and the energy, and then trying to just direct it somewhere. Because we don't have a shared space where we can set up east, northwest, and call in the ancestors and call in the land, and then summon some spirits and have a witnessing shared ritual with music and drums and something to try to get some of the unconscious and subconscious together. And maybe in the GRC, part of my skill is the dynamic between the cells. That might be more of the Zen emptiness. That's the process that is the spirit that is between the stopping points of identity and self. That's what I was looking for in the large group, for someone to sort of describe the containment, or describe the frame, put words to it. And I jumped in not feeling like I was invading that role. But maybe that, because I wasn't sure that was the purpose of the group. And I didn't want to be the giant container. And that's what some of this group can be. But then if people are using me as a transference canvas and a side distraction, then they're flooded with anxiety or demon possession or whatever, and that gets in the way. I didn't get a chance to review all the potential videos. I don't know if we'll need to do a heavy thing. This one from Jordan Peterson, or these couple from Jordan Peterson, might be a decent setup.
Had a lot of clients who've had PTSD, and without exception, every single one of them was induced by one form of malevolence or another. They have to develop a very sophisticated...
So one form or another of malevolence, and maybe malevolence is some sort of molestation of your morality, some sort of moral violation that hits you to the core.
Malevolence or another, they have to develop a very sophisticated philosophy of good and evil to get out of it, because they have a worldview in which those things don't really exist. There's no such thing as pure malevolence.
So if you don't develop a sophisticated moral substructure, then you have an omnipotence defense. You have a simple moral overlay where you want to create utopia, or you want to be the vigilante to play God and destroy someone else to get even. That's a simple morality. He's arguing for a more complex one, a more nuanced one. And you're not going to have a nuanced morality naturally. No one's helping people create a moral philosophy. That's Richard Grandin's channel where he just rants about it. Where's the workshop to improve your morality skills and get nuanced? Everyone's pitching utopia. That's the politics. There's all these quick fixes, and it's all omnipotent defenses.
Which those things don't really exist. There's no such thing as pure malevolence. Well, that's fine unless you encounter it. And then as soon as you encounter it, you won't know what to do. And then you won't be able to get on with your life. You'll do nothing but think about that and think about it and think about it and think about it. It'll disrupt your sleep. It'll put you into a permanent state of preparation for action. Because the part of your brain that's detected that, which in my estimation, by the way, is the same part, at least in part, that detects snakes. It's the same damn circuit. Once it's seen something like that, it is not going to let you go till you figure it out. And that's basically what post-traumatic stress disorder is.
That's all PTSD is.
You don't think so? Sounds pretty good to me.
No, I mean, it's precise, but it's heavy.
Oh, that's why you're laughing. I wasn't sure if you were ridiculing the notion.
No, it's a good, but it's so in your face.
It's helpful.
But that fits the divorce rage and oceanic merging. This sort of can't hold the split. You see something, you see this.
Circuit. Once it's seen something like that, it is not going to let you go till you figure it out.
It's not going to let you go. And it becomes this personal inner voice, demon, mission that won't let you go. And it just orients the rest of your future. Whether it's defending against the danger or making utopia. Anything, Suze?
Yeah, I'm just agreeing. Everything so far sounds absolutely spot on. Yeah, as always. Yeah.
So this is a very good, concise description of the problem. Also trying to normalize it. Because if you add self-judgment on just a natural mechanism that other people share here, maybe letting go of some of that judgment containment towards, we got a shared problem now.
Yeah.
Can we develop a nuanced moral structure? Can we try to rewire some of our inner world so that we can make room for some sort of future, some sort of growth and progress?
Once it's seen something like that, it is not going to let you go till you figure it out. And that's basically what post-traumatic stress disorder is.
So it's not going to let you go until you figure it out. So after my adult traumas, it didn't let me go until I figured it out. And a lot of that, for me, was my blind spot. And then I had to flip to accepting everything in first and then filtering it. But I had the weird quirk where I couldn't dump all my judgment on the person who ran over me or kidnapped me, and I wasn't able to judge myself for sticking my hand in like a fan belt. So I had to own the pain first. So I had that upside, but still, it couldn't let me go. What is this thing that can't let you go? And then what is this other thing that's trying to manage that gripping of this thing that can't let you go? This thing that says it's super important. will it link to this later clip by Peterson?
You could think of your conscience in part as the instinct that calibrates the medium to the long run. And so it knows that you sacrifice the medium to long run for the present. That's like a definition of what conscience does. It always says to you, you sacrifice the higher to the lower, right? So that's a false sacrifice. That's the kind of sacrifice that Cain makes. That's why his life goes to hell. Imagine there's a hierarchy of value with something at the pinnacle. You're always organizing your perceptions and actions around an aim. You're always climbing up a mountain of one form or another. Always.
And if this is true, you're always gripped towards the most important thing. And if the betrayal is where you're gripped based on some past wound that's affecting your future, that's why a betrayal is some giant PTSD level injury. It's fucked up your orienting system. And it's saying highly important wound. Earth-shattering, life-shattering. I can never not think about it. And then you have all these cover-up mental health strategies that are saying, just quiet your mind and do this and do that and suck it up, and it's not working. It's not working, maybe because it's trying to silence your orienting conscience mechanism that is prioritizing, this is the most important thing. This is soul murder I had. I want to scream. I want to get even. I want to become whole again, but I don't know how. And no one can witness. I'm trying to get witnessed, and no one witnesses me, or they give me the wrong feedback, and it's just futility and frustration, and you just get numbing and inadequate reflections, or you trigger other people's defenses, and then so conscience. This is a better definition of conscience from this year, I think.
You're always climbing up a mountain of one form or another. Always, always. The rule is, if you're in a hierarchy of value, that you sacrifice what's lower to what's higher. That's the nature of progress. A false sacrifice is the reverse. And conscience will tell you when you're making a false sacrifice, because it says, well, you might have skirted some trouble temporarily, but you're no longer climbing up the proper mountain. And so one of the ways that God makes himself manifest in the Old Testament in particular is as a calling. So you can imagine that there are things that grip your interest and make you enthusiastic.
So what if the inner conflict is conscience and calling or screaming? So your conscience recognizes that you're sacrificing everything towards the past. And your calling is screaming, saying, this is fucking important. I got fucking hurt. Yeah. I need help. I don't know how to reach for help. It's the giant double bind. This is where God is manifesting, which could maybe be eventually turned into some initiation or transformation. But right now we're trying to map the territory.
Right, and they have a kind of autonomy, because you find that you're interested in something, or you discover it and it grips you. Follow them and they'll lead you uphill. God is like the dynamic interplay between the calling and conscience. So the calling says, come this way towards the greatest treasure, right? The treasure's in this direction. And that'll make itself manifest in different places for different people, even though it's all pointing to the same thing. But conscience comes along for the ride and says, you're deviating from the path. You're deviating from the path. And so God is the call of conscience and the calling. It's the interplay between those two things.
It's interplay. Though you might be able to refine this description too, because this is probably, really impossible to, or really hard to map out, this interplay.
Conscience comes along for the ride and says, You're deviating from the path. You're deviating from the path. And so God is the call of conscience and the calling. It's the interplay between those two things. And you might say, well, why call that God? It's like, well, try to escape from your conscience. And then try to make yourself interested in things you're not interested in. You can't do that. There's an autonomy about it. And is it a living spirit? Those are both animating spirits. The conscience and calling are both animating spirits. God is the call of conscience and the calling. It's the interplay between those two things.
So calling is where you're gripped, your attention is gripped. Social media, anxiety, that might be our attention. Calling is being hacked. And maybe as codependents and trauma survivors, we've learned to use calling hacks to contain our flooding. Most of John's flooding towards me was after a message that potentially triggered him. So then he's trying to hack my calling mechanism to distract the message, divert the message. And then we just learn how to manipulate, have transactional relationships, artificial intimacy, trauma bonding, by manipulating each other's calling, manipulating each other's attention, trying to grip the other person's attention by injuries or by love bombing. You just do back and forth. And you can't really do elsewise, because if the calling wound is due to being invaded, even if you're not molested physically, if you were psychologically molested by somebody who got physically molested, you don't know proper distance of interacting with others. You only know enmeshment. So you're either too close or too far. So then you do too much love bombing, or you do too much attacking to hack the calling system. And then you think the calling system, the gripping of attention, that's love. The controlling of attention. Because that might be love if you had an abuser, and if you grip their attention so they didn't invade you, that's love. That's survival. That's fucking important. That's your whole life. You don't even have a self. The only thing that you have is saying, danger's here. If I don't act right and control the attention, control their calling, then my world collapses. I get invaded again. There is no self to love. Soul murder is where your self is absent. You're devoiced and you don't even know it. That person possessed your calling, possessed your attention, and then with that wound, they stole your sense of self or your voicing, and the only way you can scream is by hacking somebody else's attention.
Because it's not just about the invasion. It's about the being forgotten too. Because it's one or the other. They'll either forget you or they're invading you.
That becomes a split.
That's the split.
Right? The soul is tortured. How do you hold those two sides?
I don't know yet. It just hurts.
So then us as a group, the magic fourth, if we can put it into words, then we can witness each other. We can be co-historians to give a little bit more space and containment, to try to work together to write a history of the pain, so the pain can be grieved. and then rebirth and transformation that Yolanda did. But we're not there yet. Still mapping out the injury. What did I say with Act 2? Oh, reflection and mirrors versus stonewall and projection. So the stonewall and projection is calling, hacking each other's attention to be safe, to make this world a safer place. So you have the complaint was discord. There's a bit too much evangelizing. So you have a lot of people, maybe with molestation injuries, who are a bit too aggressive with utopia. They're going to pitch their worldview and try to shove it down people's throats.
I know I posted things earlier, like, but that's just for me personally, so if people don't like it, they can fucking deal with it. So, sorry, just saying that. It's my opinions, my religion, whatever. I'm processing it. I'm not perfect, but they can do whatever they like with it. They've got their opinions, everyone's free.
Sure. Our group allows a lot of expression.
That's what I like about it. Like, everyone's
There's
like,
a lot of space.
kind of, Yep, thank you. Not safe, but open.
It's safe and open, and then that is something that wasn't provided in the past, or that's part of the exposure therapy theory. If we can be co-historians to each other and have as much space as possible to allow a lot of expressions, then people can get closer to their pain. They can get closer to reconnecting to their voice. So a lot of the defenses that were acted out, I labeled as stonewall and projection. And that was stonewall projection. And that was modeled with Robbie's defense or stonewalls against me last Saturday. But then the stonewall isn't really what matters. What matters is his unmet need, his wounds. What about the message that he was trying to distract from or trying to block taking in? It probably wasn't about John and Deeth. It's what was said before, which was about father power or a father wound. So if the group or the recordings can reflect back and mirror back, the other side of the wound. So we'll try to control the world, and then the other side is the agenda, the unmet need, the other side of the split. The frozen terror, using this part. The rage is devoiced. Mind rape is frozen terror. So almost by definition, the frozen terror is unable to be expressed. It can only be acted out. Scared shitless baby. But scared shitless baby has a tiny voice. Other people aren't going to hear it. So the rage will be moral outrage towards some trigger, some side thing, or some sort of related thing. And the target of that moral outrage is not going to receive it because the target of the moral outrage didn't cause the original molestation, so it's impossible for that person to own it. Or that group or whatever abstraction target that the devoiced rage is going to try to express towards. But at least it's in motion. So that's the upside of getting the frozen terror to be projected outward. Sometimes we judge projection as all bad, but I think I made an argument way back when. 2021. will this connect or not? Projections are tricky to talk about. What if Western psychology is so individualistic that everything's framed from a self-centered, self-containment strategy instead of a collective, community-based strategy? So if you have a projection, maybe you can't own it. That's why it's projected. So the utility of projecting is now you can dance with somebody else that you're projecting your crap onto. You have someone embodying your projection. And the people that are good at projection can actually pull the strings of the other person to make them replay your childhood, which is even more amazing, We discount the amazement of how intertwined we are. We call that a blind spot, but we're scripting the other person to fill the role, autopilot, without even thinking about it. And then we try to stop the projection or fix it, but this might be the interplay that's the fabric of society. What if we just learn how to dance with our triggers? And it's more about the artful discovery of projections and triggering each other. And at the same time, we can fill the role of other people's projections and try to help them work out the projection instead of saying, that's your crap. Fix your crap. I fix my crap. Everyone's in their own silos smelling crap. That's why everyone's miserable. Smelling crap. Then one day, if large group had all the bathroom analogies. Because so much of mental health is about creating labels, which end up reinforcing stigma. The labels are a way of containment, so they help, because now you can see the pattern of the dynamic, so you're a little bit more oriented. But the labels also can stigmatize, and you say, that's a projection, fix it. Or this is my projection, I need to somehow control it. But this projection is a message. There's a message in the projection. You need the grunting of that African shaman thing.
The message is there, has the answer, has the medicine. There's a message, the message is there, has the answer, has the medicine. There's a message, the message is there, has the answer, has the medicine. There's a message.
So this is the tough part, that in ISTDP they're going to try to be a transference canvas, and the therapist has to somehow not take it personal and do this, maybe.
He's interacting with the transference. 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 He's interacting with the...
And try to stay in this.
Our task is not to repeat what she said. Our task is to analyze what she said. Our task is not to repeat what she said. Our task is to analyze. What was the response? I just related to her. How is she responding to that? What is that? What was the patient's response to intervention? What was the response? I just related to her. How is she responding to that?
Ooh. That was a little bit of a jump. But trying to get to some sort of way out from calling and conscience. So one side of calling is that we get obsessed about calling, because calling controls attention. Calling grips your attention and grips other people's attention. So if I'm like some wandering entity in the world, or in another dimension, and I want to feed off emotional energy, if I could steer somebody's calling and plant sweet nothings into navigating their already gripped attention of what's important, then maybe I could now have a host. I could be the host and now possess somebody. Because I'm a disembodied entity that I don't have my own batteries. So I gotta find a human body that has life. So I can feed off their life force, their fear, their frozen fear, their mind rape. This thing, right? Their devoiced rage. But what's in the way? If God is the interchange between calling and conscience, what would get in the way of calling and conscience sort of resynchronizing to try to guide the future to help the person become whole? The conscience. If I could give you sweet nothings in your ear and say, your conscience is hating you and yelling at you, it's a bad guy, it's a bad voice, it's scolding you, choose a path of moral outrage, choose a path of space invasion, choose a path of transcendent love that's divorced from other forms of love. Is that the sound, is that the voice of a conscience, or is that the voice of an entity that is trying to feed off paranoia and frozen terror, that is offering splitting of just sensory pleasure, and in exchange they feed off your frozen terror? And it's even better when the entity pushes you to trigger terror in somebody else, because entity can feed off the other person's terror. Life force. Because Peterson's saying, if trauma is a moral injury, and you need a sophisticated moral landscape, you need a sophisticated definition of malevolence. You got to map the landscape of evil. That's what I was obsessed about after my traumas. I went into religion and Christianity and read all this stuff, and Jordan Peterson was the only person who was putting words to malevolence. The Bible verses didn't. It was inadequate. And my injury wasn't malevolence. My injury was just people didn't see me, but it felt like malevolence. I was in their way. I was just a wallet. I was just someone who triggered a wound, and I got a giant unseen injury, but maybe I also had some malevolence in my ancestry. What did I see for Act 3? Oh, I think I've already covered some of it. So. Self-hate and disowning versus is equal to being possessed and devaluation defenses. So somehow our brain has equated devaluing someone else and dehumanizing somebody else, destroying somebody else's soul, will somehow create math where my soul will get repaired by destroying somebody else's. What's the logic here? I will become whole. Now, if you eat somebody else's soul, okay, that might be logic. But if you're just going to cause injury, and how's the math work? I'm appealing to your conscience, not appealing to your potentially entity's emotional reasoning voice. Because I don't need to be another replacement demon. God is interplay between conscience and calling. God is aligned with reality and shared reality. So God's position doesn't need to be over-argued. Your conscience is already in there, unless you're a psychopath, or that's a theory. They don't have a conscience, or it's disconnected. So if I just give voice to the conscience, it will awaken in some wisdom within to align your calling and your conscience towards some way out, some way towards wholeness. This is where it's more of a spiritual problem, and that's where psychology, or modern psychology, maybe isn't able to address the spiritual teachings. It cheats and pulls stuff from this sector. But if the teacher cannot embody the Shakti, the spiritual transmission, to call forth and summon your conscience, to invite you to have a spiritual warfare, it is about malevolence and fighting demons, metaphorically, or maybe it's more real than real. It's in this realm of transcendent realm. Let's get some air and see if Stephen Snyder's Zen teaching make any more sense. It might or might not, I don't know. This one or this one? We'll see.
When I or others had painful or suffering situations, my strategy was to get away, orient towards something that's beneficial or good, blocking out what I thought is negative. But what I see is compassion is really about tenderness. It's really about a tender holding. And I learned this really as a parent. As my children got to be teenagers, I could tell they were going to be running headfirst into a brick wall. And I felt my function as a parent was to prevent that. Almost always, immediately after that, they would find a way to run into that same brick wall headfirst when I wasn't around or didn't know about it.
So this could be framed in calling. So his father role, he hijacked the teenager's desire to be a rebel. And he could overpower his kids. But then he discovered it was counterproductive because the calling is still that strong. The calling to rebel, the calling to explore. So he would play a better role at maybe giving space and maybe making the lessons faster. This is what's going to happen. Go do it. You're going to find out. Instead of the kid doing it 10 times, the kid will do it 3 times.
And they would probably sustain more damage than if they had hit the brick wall the first time. So I realized I wasn't actually helping them by taking away the suffering.
And what told him that he wasn't helping them? His conscience. By reflecting, not just his intellect, by reflecting and doing math, but also looking, I want to love my kid for the long term. Am I protecting him from the long term by protecting him from a small injury now, where he ends up doing a bigger injury because I got involved? His conscience and Zen meditation and some sort of reflection allowed him to realize that, oh, there's a more compassionate way that's more aligned with God. It might seem a little harsh based on mental health super empaths that are crying for validation and all these monologue blah.
And I thought back on my own life and realized what life lessons I'd learned from doing just that.
That's his conscience. What if your conscience is the glue of your soul? So maybe you haven't been divorced. Your conscience is trying to recongeal you. You need a place to maybe practice and some people to reflect back, but you already have the inner glue and the inner drive to become whole again. 9:10. Okay. Maybe I can land this. So if you already have your conscience, or you already have a conscience and it's talking to you and tormenting you, you have the glue. You have the congealing. You have the self-organizing mechanism. You've been told a lie by the archons. by mental health, by entities that are feeding off your frozen fear. Even the spiri weary ones that are fighting off the lower demons, they got other higher demons that are also feeding off fear. Because there's no need to use these spiritual hacks when you have a conscience. You already have God in you. That's the teachings, but the people are perverting the teachings, hacking the calling system for their benefit, for their omnipotence defense, for their desire to force utopia onto the world. But because there's no examples of people who have a conscience and are role modeling it with some sort of power against devaluation, that's part of one of the missing things. Meeting the devaluation with some sort of solidity, which is
You meet his disrespect with strength. You meet his disrespect with strength. You meet his disrespect with strength. You meet his.
So this formula of meeting devaluation defenses with strength, I wasn't sold on it in the early days.
You meet his disrespect with strength. You meet his disrespect with strength. You meet.
Partially because I'm reckless, so I'll throw my body into the right cause, so it's easy for me. For me, that is my path. But working with parts and demons and other stuff, I always thought, tend and befriend. There isn't this crazy super schizophrenic superego level type of thing, invasion, that needs to be met with strength, needs to be met with consciousness, needs to be met with God reality. That needs to be maybe shamed with like calling Jesus or calling God or some sort of thing to say, your conscience is stronger than this nonsense. My conscience is able to take on your demon attack and moral outrage, whatever. That strength isn't modeled.
So they're important. And we each need to learn to stop running into the wall. But we stop when when it's painful enough. So that's where the tender holding comes in. I don't know what the right answer is, but I can at least help hold it with you, and we can give some time and some tenderness to the situation.
So the pain would teach a lesson. And if he trusts the pain and the tender holding of the pain to provide the learning, that is not what mental health is doing. Mental health is assuming the therapist's expertise or the medication or the relationship or the model is providing the answers. ISTDP has the UTA, so they're conceding that it's the therapist's alliance with the unconscious. That's a healing mechanism. That's a bit closer. That matches this model. Because the pain is where the message is. Or the pain keeps coming back, that might be your conscience with the message, with the unmet need. So if we just judge pain as all bad and try to run away from it, could that be a parasite that's feeding off your terror, your frozen terror? Could that be even a mental health expert or a cult leader that's sending a message of over-control to feed off the group paranoia and terror? The answer is in you. I'm just making an argument because I'm making a plea that your conscience can figure it out. So if I take the side of reality and conscience and math, I think math will win over bad math. But not if you're really triggered. But long-term math should win over bad math.
It's really about a tender holding. What I have students watch for is incongruent behavior, and just watch for the patterns. Who do you take yourself to be? I'm the little one. I'm the one who doesn't know much. I'm worthless. I'm unlovable, whatever it is. Incongruent behavior. I started doing it myself many, many years ago when my kids were young. I began writing down times when I overreacted with my kids. Incongruent behavior. I had to really watch my behavior. And then I would analyze it each night. I'd go through this process. Often when I had an overreaction, I had taken in a piece of my mother or a piece of my father or someone else. When somebody does this behavior, when they drop food on the floor, it's a strong reaction. That was like watching somebody else. I mean, that was not how I want to behave and not who I take myself to be right now.
So this practice of journaling his behavior is co-historian himself. But also by being a co-historian, his moral substructure is making a decision on his character. And what mechanism of a moral substructure would be evaluating his behavior of who he wants to be based on what the behavior is? Isn't that a definition of conscience? But how much of mental health is building your conscience? How much do you see other people working on building their conscience muscle? Maybe we've outsourced it to religion and God as a pointer. But if Peterson's argument, or framing that calling and conscience, the interplay, that's where God shows up in our life. That's where God is able to embody and show his love, or her love. All these gender people. Brad's saying hi. He's taking a stop. Or all.
Incongruent behavior. We can really tell our level of realization really by how we behave in our relationships. It's one of the great tests to see. And it doesn't mean that you have a perfect relationship with everybody if you're awake, but it means you bring your full self to it. It's really.
It means you bring your full self. You show up. If you bring your full self and you show up, is that also where you're embodying the combination of calling and conscience? If God is a pointer for wholeness, completeness, your full self showing up is you're embodying as much God, unity, oneness, when you're with others. Versus what we see when people preach God and tout God and say verses, are they using a calling hack to try to force you into that, or make them feel good that they're preaching the message and changing the world towards utopia?
Really about a tender holding. Use the lens of truth. Observe your behavior. You see a behavior that's incongruent. Why are you doing it? What's it serving? Use the lens of truth. It's just recognizing what's true, and whatever's true, we let land. Whatever's false, you have to let go of. What's it serving?
That's harder. Whatever's false, you have to let go of. He has years of Buddhist practice and whatnot. Learning to let go of what's not needed or false. That's a good hard pointer.
It's just recognizing what's true, and whatever's true, we let land. Whatever's false, you have to let go of. What's it serving? Why are you doing it? Use the lens of truth.
So if you just sit with the question in your journal, or it's a common question or curiosity, what's it serving? What are you doing? What's it serving? What is it?
Why are you doing it? Use the lens of truth.
Why are you doing it? Why are you doing it?
Whatever's true, we let land. Whatever's false, you have to let go of. What's it serving? Why are you doing it? Use the lens of truth.
Oh, what's it serving? Oh, how could I not catch that? Isn't that an argument that could be a pointer about entities that you might be serving? Or past patterns you might be serving? That your conscience, if it catches it, it might have some input, might have some wisdom. What if the answers are in you? What if your answers are in your nightmares? What if your answers are in your tortured inner chatter? Or your conscience is fighting against introjects and social constructs and stuff, old patterns and parts, however you want to lay out the inner ego states stuff. And your conscience has always been there. It's always been giving messages to you, but mental health is trying to shame it, cover it up. That was Holly's critique when I said her message was a cover-up. She got outraged about that. Oh, it's a cover-up. How dare you say it's a cover-up, Keith? It's only my opinion. Maybe I'll give you a wake-up call. I only had an opinion that it was that was a cover-up. She's welcome to her opinion, but she had outrage. But I didn't have Tamara's energy. Like this, I need this energy, this sort of sermon stuff to set it up. All right, you guys ready?
That's my opinion! That's my opinion! That's my opinion!
But no, with Holly, I wasn't allowed to have an opinion.
Why can't anybody have an opinion but you? Why can't anybody have an opinion but you? Why can't anybody have an opinion but you? Why can't anybody have an opinion but you?
So when only one opinion is allowed, what is that serving? What defense is it serving? What evidence is it pointing to? What kind of splitting defense, splitting projection survival instinct is it serving? Why
can't anybody have an opinion but you? Why can't anybody have an opinion but you? Why can't anybody have an opinion but you? Why can't
Maybe we need more Tamaras to sort of just shake us up. She might not be right all the time, but at least you can knock the demon a little off balance and maybe knock our conscience off balance. Let's see, any other wisdom from meditation people? So this might be the trap of calling hacks. A more common term is justification.
I realized this on the cushion or in monastic life. At one point, I saw myself staying quiet in a moment where the personal cost was, I deemed it just subconsciously to be too great to speak out. And someone was going to not have me at their back when they needed it because of this, and I caught myself, oh, wow, you might have been one of those cowards who just sat around and let this stuff happen because the reputational cost or the personal cost was too great. That's like, yeah, that's how Nazism happens. Not because people love hate. I'm against hate. Well, that's not how Nazism comes about. People are like, I hate. It's like some kind of rage explodes inside someone and they start tearing down the system, Or there's a bunch of people who are just too cowardly to speak out. It's complicated, right? It's complicated.
So a judgment of cowardly behavior, would that be from your conscience? And then if Deeth is using J.D. Vance's book to argue against cowardice and to make a plea for your father side, for father power, might have also been making a plea for conscience. And if somebody has parasitic entities that are feeding off frozen terra and id gratification on steroids, that entity might possess a person to fight against conscience. If that's what's happening in their inner world, then that becomes acted out in an external split. Waking up the conscience is World War III. Being a voice for conscience, the whole world falls apart. So he's not even seeing me. The demon, whatever the pattern, the old trauma, is possessing and taking over, gripping his energy, that the trigger, me and my message, is a threat. And it feels like home, feels like childhood. If conscience isn't silenced, if cowardice is called out, the world's going to fall apart. If his dad's cowardice is called out, then the dad's going to beat him, because the dad probably is cowardly to the mother. I think that's sort of the description, right? So he had to bite his tongue, and then by biting his tongue, by seeing the cowardice and wanting dad to show up more, that ate at his soul, caused a lifelong wound. Can we witness that wound? Maybe that's what the tenderness, that's part of what he needs for tender attention.
Something that I was doing in my life that I kind of subconsciously knew was not good. And I found myself running through perfectly airtight justifications for why it was okay to do that thing. And that was the moment when I'm like, oh, this is what the Nazis did. When they were stuffing people into boxcars, they were going through this thing like, well, yes, it's of course because this and this and this and this. And
Right.
all perfectly justified, you know? And I realized, oh, you can justify anything.
Right.
That was a big wake up moment. But if I could justify that, by extension, I could get into that position where I can justify any horrible thing and make it sound, like it's a good thing to do. Oh, yeah, I got to be careful about that. At this point, after the last few years, I'm like questioning everything. Like I'm looking at things that I would never have even questioned before going, yeah, I don't know. That sounds like there might be something behind that.
Now you could probably overdo the questioning, but if the calling mechanism of gripping your attention is part of the double binds that we can put ourselves in to justify anything, any discrepancy between inner and outer, anything that would cause our conscience to judge ourselves or to say, wait, something needs to change. But are we fully using our calling to justify? Or do we have the demon of academia or the archons of the modernization, colonization, imperialistic mindset of toxic superego controls? So it's not just us. Our society is mirroring all this justification stuff. And then they're referring to Hitler as some massive evil because we're outsourcing our conscience of not wanting to repeat World War II. We still haven't digested the horror and the ugliness of reaching that level. Now, well, this makes sense. I think it might. This was Jordan Peterson with Destiny, a short clip.
Right, because we see it all throughout the animal kingdom that there's some level of punishment or some level of force. It's really justice when you're the tatter, not when you're the titter, though, right?
No,
when you're the titter, it's just retribution.
No, I don't think that's true either. Look, if you read Crime and Punishment, for example, Raskolnikov gets away with murder, and he has a justification for it. That disturbs his own relationship with himself.
if you didn't have role models of other people who have a healthy relationship with self, and they actively groomed your ability to develop a relationship with yourself, and then now all the mental health experts and all the people out there also have self-hate. So where are you going to find a role model of somebody who has a healthy relationship with self? It's inevitable you're going to latch onto some sort of self-punitive superego, anti-conscience sort of relationship inside. And that'll feel bad. So then those same people will give you meditation retreats and give you self-help hacks and all kinds of wounded healer practices. But if you fully numb your pain and you numb your conscience voice, your inner conscience voice, you're numbing your connection to God. You're numbing your connection to healing. You're being potentially duped by archons. We had a Zoom meeting on archons way back when. Do I still have that? I do here. So.
The archons are the great enemies of humanity. Your very life itself is being fed on. The archons are the great enemies of humanity. Your very life itself is being fed on. The archons are the great enemies of humanity. Your very life itself is being fed on. The archons.
The Matrix. We're all batteries. And we break free from it. Then we're on some ship and we eat like gruel. So stay in the dream. Relationship with self. Good relationship with self. Let's land this.
For it. That disturbs his own relationship with himself so profoundly that he can't stand it, such that when a just punishment is finally meted out to him, it's a relief. And that's not rare. There isn't anything more terrifying than breaking a moral rule that you thought you had the ability to break and finding out that you're somewhere now that you really don't want to be.
That's the price of that. You fall off your moral map.
There's nothing worse in your own life than waiting for the other shoe to drop. If you
look at Destiny, so comfortable.
You've transgressed against a moral rule and now you're an outsider because
I've made my message. I can relax now. See how it lands on Destiny.
life than waiting for the other shoe to drop. If you've transgressed against a moral rule and now you're an outsider because of that, you live in no man's land.
He's arguing with reality, so he doesn't need to oversell it. Now he knows I can lean back.
The fact that you have just retribution coming to you, that can be a precondition for your atonement and your integration back into society.
But it's
Let me justify my way out of this.
probably important to note that depending on the system you exist in, those moral transgressions just aren't.
Is there any evidence outside of those just aren't?
Right? Those moral transgressions just aren't, right?
Right? That means he can't even self-gaslight.
Right? Right?
We could have used a pure invitational strategy to distribute the vaccine. It would have been much more.
Oh, yes. Peterson still has the issue of the vaccine thing. I think it has. Oh, this is a conscience argument. That's where you can link.
Distribute the vaccine. It would have been much more effective. And it was bad policy, rushed. We're in an emergency. We have to use force. It's like, no, you weren't. It wasn't the kind of emergency that justified force, not least because behavioral psychologists have known for decades that force is actually not a very effective motivator. It produces a vicious kickback.
It did not justify your justice mechanism, your disgust mechanism, your conscience, versus archons and abstract superegos that are trying to impose behavior. social eugenics. So they're going to use a short-term fix that might feed a bunch of entities that love frozen terror. But long-term, has a vicious kickback.
Actually not a very effective motivator. It produces a vicious kickback, is that the net deaths from people stopping using valid vaccines as a consequence of general skepticism about vaccination.
And the added conspiracy theory and added doubt about government that's blown out into political elections now, that COVID broke trust. What kind of damage has that caused?
Is going to cause, in my estimation, over any reasonable amount of time, far more deaths than COVID itself caused. You violate people's trust at your great peril, because if you make me do something, I'm going to be a little skeptical of you for a long time.
So we started with paranoia, right? So here's maybe healthy paranoia, or how paranoia appears. So if trust is broken and people sense there's ulterior motives, if they sense people are benefiting off their fear, if there's an entity that might be feeding off frozen terror and control stuff, they're gonna want to fight it or do something, resist it. So there is still a conscience somewhere that's reacting and calling to you, wanting to nurture your pain, giving you little clues on how to get towards wholeness and healing, nurturing. Ooh, that's pretty good for an ending, but that's also a bit heavy. This isn't the same theme, but it might link. It's a bit softer of an ending, or heartwarming, maybe.
Do you feel remorse for what you did?
Not really. Throwing that chair was the best thing that ever happened to me. If I didn't throw that chair through the window, I wouldn't have stopped drinking.
See?
Wouldn't have joined
Final
AA
break.
or stuck with therapy. When I threw that chair, my nephew came back into my life. No matter how much I told him to scram, he just stuck around. For 40 years, I have pushed people away. Not because I thought they would hurt me, but because I thought I would hurt them. I thought I would hurt them. I told myself I was doing it for their own good. Because I'm broken, right? But I was wrong. I wasn't broken. I was sick. And when you're sick, you gotta let the people who care about you to help. You gotta let the people who care about you to help.
Peter, part of the co-coaching group, when I was playing the Gregorian chants, he's mentioned plain song. So Gregorian chants are a subcategory of plain song. They are an early version of music written in a different, more simpler musical note. And they're an offshoot of just chanting. So we have to go back to the early days where writing notes wasn't there wasn't a bunch of written paper. And if there wasn't written paper and there wasn't universalized music, transmitting shared songs had to be an oral tradition, or just this sort of rough practice that spontaneously the collective could do. So then chanting would be less musical, and it'd just be this sort of rhythmic something. Or maybe one or two people would call and respond, and then that the spirit of the call and the response would be the music. So try to imagine an earlier time where you wouldn't have the musical instruments being the thread, or the musical recordings we're hearing now as a thread. You're actually having a live performance that you're part of. That's a ritual of devotion. That's a ritual of wholeness. That's a ritual of connecting to the shared humanity. And then plus there's not as many distractions as we have now, so these older times, the religious rituals and the group activities of chanting and devotion and going to church in this giant, awe-inspiring building, they might have been much, much richer. And people might have had much more richer interior lives. A lot of modern technology that's claiming that we've arrived is dismissing the spiritual poverty that might be common now. This soul agony might be what's driving the depression rates and suicidal drive. And then we're just trying to create more mechanisms to contain that and manage it and explain it away. It is loss of connection and loss of social fabric, but it might also be spiritual poverty, soul hunger, soul agony, lack of intimacy. Yolanda's complaint, or the success story that she had so much beautiful intimacy with her husband that was beyond sex, that was probably described better in Chinese, but tapping into this aesthetic of God as beauty, as ultimate goodness, as the source of love, as something that's expansive, as all healing, all the old pointers. We don't have the communities that are embodying that sort of experience to give you, to fill your fountain, to fill your empty whatever vessel, to go to the church and get your whatever the pointer is. You get recharged in modern terms. To have that as your watering hole. You still have the structures and sort of the routine, but they're also probably invaded by archons and things that are trying to steal attention to feed off a calling hack, justification hack. These attention hacks to take advantage of people with consciences that aren't aligned to the greatest good, to beauty, to harmony, to love. Haha. Sunday mornings in pub. Haha. Church basement coffee. It might be the ritual. That was part of my mom's sanctuary during Taiwan days. I didn't really get, but she found the church comforting. It might have been an escape from the martial law chaos.
Yeah, go hang out with the old folks too.
Yeah, church ladies, tea. Rather ordinary things, but maybe it fills the soul, or fills your humanity. Refill.